She's the leading lady we love to hate. Think you could survive a rendezvous with her? Or maybe you'd like to emulate her. Come along with me on a roller coaster ride of death and destruction as we shine a spotlight on the darker aspects of the Vamps from the silent film era. Hi, welcome back to 100 Years of Romance, a decade-by-decade look at sex, love, and romance on the silver screen. This is Cinema Rolls, your go-to channel for movie comparisons, and I'm your host, Basha. I just know you're going to love this deep dive into the torrid love lives of the vamps of the silver screen and the murder and mayhem that follow in their wake. So, let's get started. In part 1 of this episode, we already looked at who and what the vamps were, how they lured their victims, the hold they had over men and sometimes women, and how they manipulate men to get what they want. If you missed that one, you'll want to click on the link below and watch it first. Now, I think we can say, without exception, that once a vamp enters a man's life, things seem to fall apart on every level, and broken relationships are among the first casualties. In the 1926 film Flesh and the Devil, Leo and Ulrich have been bosom buddies since childhood. But Felicitas, played by Greta Garbo, marries Ulrich when she had promised to wait for Leo. Needless to say, this puts a strain on their friendship, which comes to a head when Felicitas starts trying to draw Leo back into her web. More on that later. In the 1920 film Sex, also known as The Spider Woman, when Philip Overton's wife learns of his affair with a cabaret dancer named Adrienne, she confronts Adrienne, who laughs and tells her, "You haven't been robbed, you lost something. I found it, and I intend to keep it." Philip's wife divorces him, but Adrienne almost immediately breaks it off with him to pursue a dashing young millionaire. But what goes around comes around, as you'll see when we look at how her story ends. In Sappho, also known as Mad Love, Richard abandons his childhood sweetheart Mary for Sappho until he eventually comes to his senses. But when he drinks a toast to his new bride at their wedding, he can only see Sappho when he looks at Mary's face. In the 1929 film Pandora's Box, this next scene is the only time we see the normally sweet and self-sacrificing Lulu, played by Louise Brooks, consciously inflicting harm in order to get her way. It's opening night for her big number in a dance review, something she's really been looking forward to. But when she sees Dr. Schoen with his fiancée, the woman he chose to marry instead of her, she refuses to dance for that woman. As we saw in part 1, Dr. Schoen had been keeping Lulu for his private use, but refused to marry her because of her reputation, a reputation that he helped her build. He's called upon to reason with her in her dressing room, and now she's got him just where she wants him. When he laughs at her childlike tantrum, she's infuriated and pummels him with her fists. But he has absolutely no willpower when it comes to her, and they're locked in an embrace when his fiancée arrives. We can tell from Lulu's triumphant smile that this is what she intended all along. Needless to say, the engagement is ended, and she dusts herself off happily and goes to dance while Dr. Schoen tells his son Alva, "Now I'll have to marry Lulu. This is my public execution." So that was one relationship down for Dr. Schoen, and another one to go on his wedding night with Lulu when Dr. Schoen catches her with his son Alva and just tells Alva to go catch his train. But he's probably overheard Alva asking Lulu to go away with him, so the father-son relationship is pretty much over as well. And in The Woman Men Yearn For, starring Greta Garbo, Henry finds himself compelled to help Stasha escape her captor, abandoning his own bride on his wedding night and effectively ending his marriage. After the adventure reaches its inevitable conclusion, he heads home with nobody left to go home to. More than any of the other films we've looked at, this one really illustrates the idea that the vamp was the prototype for the femme fatale that we see in the films noir of the 40s and 50s. Just like the femme fatale exemplified in movies like 1944's Double Indemnity starring Barbara Stanwyck, Fred MacMurray, and Edward G. Robinson, or The Maltese Falcon starring Mary Astor, Humphrey Bogart, and Peter Lorre, she approaches the protagonist, in this case Henry LeBlanc, seeking help with a problem. She herself appears to be vulnerable and helpless, and he takes pity on her, with a little encouragement from her, of course. And whether by design or by chance, his involvement with her gets him into a heap of trouble. But as we'll see when we look at the romance movies of the 40s and 50s, the stakes are usually a lot higher in the later decades, and the femmes fatale usually much more deadly. If your head isn't swimming by the time you finish watching this video, then I haven't done a good enough job of showing you just how messy and chaotic the Vamps' tangled webs of intrigue can be. Now, back to our stories. Relationships are not the only casualties of vamp passion. Being entangled with them can lead to financial consequences as well, and it's not always the man who takes the fall. In Pandora's Box, Countess Geschwitz's interest in Lulu seems to be more than just friendly. And later, when Lulu's on the run from the law, the Countess gives her a large sum of money to prevent her from being sold to an Egyptian man by her stage manager, Rodrigo, who threatens to turn Lulu into the police for the reward money. And in the 1929 musical Hallelujah, starring Nina Mae McKinney, when Chick cons Zeke out of his $100 in a game of craps, he's not just out the $100 and his reputation with his entire community that worked to earn it. As we'll see in just a few minutes, he also loses something a lot more precious than either money or his reputation. Another man who loses his reputation and more at the hands of a vamp is Constable Albert Holk in the 1929 movie Asphalt, who's arrested for murder after he kills a rival in a scuffle in his lover's flat. The lover that he should have arrested is a jewel thief. To make matters worse, it's his own father, the chief constable, who brings him into the station. In the 1926 film The Temptress, starring Greta Garbo, the wealthy banker Fontenoy throws a banquet in Elena's honor and ironically drinks a toast to her for bringing about his financial ruin, saying that she's the type of woman who never asks for anything but takes whatever's given her. While Elena is more interested in flirting with Robledo, Fontenoy then drinks his cup of poison, committing a very public suicide. Once under the spell of a vamp, a man is usually willing to sacrifice just about anything for her. But she sometimes has the same hold over other women. In this scene from Pandora's Box, Lulu convinces Countess Schwitzer to distract Rodrigo by seducing him to give Lulu a chance to escape. And considering what we saw of the Countess's inclinations earlier, this is no small sacrifice on her part. In extreme cases, men are even driven to madness by their obsession with a vamp. This is the premise for the movie Sappho, where Richard goes to confront the woman responsible for sending his brother to the lunatic asylum. But he falls under her spell as well. And any time a vamp has more than one man vying for her attention, jealousy and violence are never far behind. We already saw in part 1 what happens when one of Sappho's lovers finds her with her new love interest, Richard. Ironically, after Richard has left Sappho and gotten engaged with another woman, he attends one of Sappho's performances and sees her catching the eye of an admirer from the stage. He storms into her dressing room demanding to know if that was her lover. He doesn't want her, but he doesn't want anyone else to have her either. In The Temptress, Elena catches the eye of Robledo's rival, Manos Duras, and it leads to some unintended consequences. So, Robledo steps in, seemingly to defend her honor. Take a good look at her face while they're dueling. She seems scared, but she also seems intrigued. And is that just me, or does she seem to be getting off on it? And later, she uses doctoring Robledo's wounds as an excuse for more flirting. But Manos Duras hasn't forgotten about her yet. He wants to do something really spectacular to get Elena's attention. So, in her honor, he blows up the dam that Robledo and his workers are building. But only half the workers are on hand to stem the damage. The rest are vying for her attention at yet another fiesta in her honor. In Pandora's Box, when Dr. Schoen marries Lulu only to find her entertaining her father and stage manager in the bridal suite on their wedding night, he shows them out at gunpoint without even finding out who they are, and her story goes rapidly downhill from there. He flies into a murderous rage and tries to force Lulu to kill herself. The gun goes off in the struggle and he dies. While she's on trial for his murder, even though the dead man's son has testified that the gun went off accidentally, the prosecutor pushes for the death penalty solely based on her reputation as a loose woman and draws an analogy between her and Pandora in Greek mythology, who unleashed all manner of evil into the world by opening her box. In other words, how dare you be so beautiful and charming? How could men possibly be responsible for anything they do because of their unhealthy obsession with you? And we see this theme in one movie after another. It's Eve in the Garden of Eden all over again, isn't it? Have you ever wondered why Adam never takes responsibility for his part in it? I mean, yeah, sure, she tempted him with the apple, I get it. But he could have said no thank you. Who are these men that have no will of their own? Of course, I'm not denying that some of these women can be pretty manipulative, but grow a backbone, guys. Okay, now that I've had my little rant, let's get back to the devastating effect that vamps have on others. Whether it be in a duel or otherwise, intentional or not, the vamp often incites men to murder. In Sunrise, the husband lures his wife onto a boat and attempts to drown her, almost hypnotically following the suggestion of his lover from the city. And in Flesh and the Devil, Felicitas and Leo's love-making session is interrupted when her husband, the Count, returns home early. The Count challenges Leo to a duel and he ends up getting killed in the process. As penance, Leo goes off to military service for 5 years with Felicitas promising to wait for him. When he returns and finds her married to his best friend Ulrich, she wastes no time in starting things up with Leo again, and when Ulrich discovers them together, he challenges Leo to a duel. We'll get back to the exciting conclusion of their story later, but first, back to the murder and mayhem. In The Temptress, we already saw Manos Duras and Robledo in a duel over Elena using whips. Later on, Manos Duras comes back and shoots at Robledo, but Elena's husband is caught in the crossfire and gets killed instead. There's yet another duel over Elena at a fiesta in her honor where two best friends are fighting over her, and one of them runs the other through with a sword. In Hallelujah, Zeke accidentally shoots and kills his own brother in a scuffle after Chick uses her feminine wiles to con him into losing everything he has in a game of craps. Of course, not all the changes the vamp brings about in the lives of her men are negative. For Zeke, his chance encounter with Chick sends his life on a roller coaster ride, from picking cotton in the fields to preaching in a revival tent to working in a sawmill as her husband to life in a chain gang and back home again. But no matter how much havoc they've wreaked in a man's life, the men always seem to be able to forgive the vamp anything, as we already saw in Sappho, where Richard falls for her and abandons everything, even though he came to seek revenge on her for having driven her brother mad. And in Flesh and the Devil, Leo falls back under the spell of Felicitas after she's lied to him, then turned him into a murderer, and then married his best friend while she was supposed to be waiting for him. In Pandora's Box, when Lulu escapes after her trial for killing her husband, his son Alva is initially outraged to see her show up at his father's home, but she soon convinces him to leave the country with her, and it seems that all is forgiven and forgotten. And you might think that Zeke from Hallelujah would want nothing to do with Chick after her conniving ways led him to kill his brother, but his new vocation as a preacher must be having some effect on him, because he turns the other cheek not just once, but twice when she turns him into a murderer for the second time. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll get to all that when we talk about how their stories end. In Asphalt, when Betty sends Constable Holk a gift after their first night together, the night he should have been arresting her, he's angry because he thinks she's trying to bribe him. But all it takes is a little kiss, and the next thing you know, he's proposing. And he forgives her something much, much worse later on, but that story will have to wait until the end. And last but not least, in The Woman Men Yearned For, after Stasha has dragged Henry into her web of intrigue by leading him to believe that she was being abducted and getting him to abandon his bride on their wedding night in order to help her, she confesses to having had her husband murdered by none other than her supposed abductor. And what do you think his response is? "Poor Stasha, in spite of everything, I love you." Mind you, this is after having known her for less than 24 hours. So, now that we've seen what a mess the vamp usually leaves in her wake and how the victims seem to be able to forgive them everything, the question remains, can we, the viewer, forgive them as well? Are there ever any mitigating circumstances? Is a vamp ever a victim herself? How did she get to be the way she is? That's what we're going to pick up in part 3 of this episode when things really get cooking. We're going to take a look at their backstories and whether or not their characters evolve or undergo any personal growth over time, and then we'll wrap it up by exploring how their stories end. So, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. See you next time. Until then, try some more cinema rolls. They're good for you.